Today we explore transformation with Nick Goblirsch, an HR executive turned impassioned entrepreneur whose personal odyssey through pivotal moments drives his mission to spark worldwide liberation, arming individuals with the tools and insights they need to find purpose, to embrace change, and to carve out truly fulfilled lives. Nick, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Brad. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. So perhaps for those who are not familiar with your work yet, you could share a little bit about your story and what led you to where you are now.
I am a simple person, Brad. I'm not very complex, but I'm a big believer in an experiential life. As many experiences we can get in our life, we're only going to prepare ourselves to deal with things that haven't happened yet. And I could definitely say where I am right now, not only have I experienced or have learned from my own experiences, but I spend a lot of time learning a lot from the experience of others. I am a happily married man. My wife, Megan, and my kids, Abby and Nathan, are meandering around the house as I speak to you. I am currently I'm an entrepreneur. I never thought I'd ever be an entrepreneur, ever. I always thought I'd work for someone. I used to make commitments to myself that it was much easier to work for someone else. But like most people, when they go to school, it's an enormous amount of pressure, Brad, to kids. I say in any generation, even like when young kids, we always ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I think that's such an enormously heavy and irrational question to ask a child, or even someone who is just reaching adulthood, to say to anyone, what are you going to be when you grow up? Hopefully they're nice people. That's really something that we hope they become. But usually when people ask that question, it's usually based on their profession, right? I don't know, Brad, if your parents did that, but if you had any pressure to say,
oh, yes,
you had to have it all figured out when you were 18 or 20 or whatever it was. I mean, we were just chatting earlier, like, neither of us really know how we're figuring it out. But at the current moment right now, I mean, what do you think, Brad? Did you really know what you wanted to be when you grow up at 18?
No, not at all. And I think there was a lot of pressure. And as a result, I went traveling because I thought, well, if I'm ever going to discover it, it'll be whilst exploring the world. And I still don't feel like I've fully discovered who it is that I'm going to be. So, but rather, I think, as you said, I don't want to be defined by what I do. It's more contribution or impact based.
Exactly. It's funny you say that, because when I graduated with an art degree, like most people don't, and people told me, probably when I graduated, good luck in finding a job. Now, a lot of my friends at the time were going to school for accounting and finance and anything that could get them a step in the door to find a profitable opportunity. I'm a Generation X. I don't know if you're on the cusp of Generation X, but we were always raised, I believe, in the mindset that you get a college degree, show the world that you can get one, because at the time, not a lot of people had one. I always joke that undergrad nows are like PhDs. People now get PhDs now like they got masters back when we were in school. It's crazy. And then multiple doctorates are now the thing. So I went to school, got this degree, and realized that there's not much I could do with it. I did know once, how I was raised, like I was saying, that the best thing I could do is get my foot in the door somewhere. So graduated college, I answered an ad, got a job with a door-to-door sales company. It was a kind of a weird experience, but taught me a lot of things about, again, another experience, teaching me a lot of things about how to deal with people, multiple people. I was a terrible salesman, Brad. I had to talk to twice as many people to make half the amount of money that everyone was making. But I started to learn in that process what I was good at. I was good at teaching. I was good at interviewing. I was good at those who can't do teach. I liked seeing people build their confidence. That was always something enjoyable to me. And I started realizing, it's funny now saying that out loud, that I think I was always born to serve someone. I just feel like having a life of service, even servant leadership, is something that I think is just so much. I would just, knowing that and knowing I was proficient in that, I'd die happy, knowing I could impact and serve as many people as possible. So things didn't work out with sales. I ended up moving in with my in-laws. back in 2020 with everything I owned in a car. My father-in-law was a plumber in Atlantic City, and he was explaining to me, I don't know how familiar you are, Brad, with Atlantic City. It's kind of like the East Coast, Las Vegas, but not really. He told me or asked me, what did you do? What were you comfortable doing when you did your sales stuff? I said, well, I liked interviewing. And he said, well, there's this profession out there called human resources. Casinos have it. When I drive you in the city, I'll drop you off and you can apply for jobs. They're always hiring. So long story short, I get in there, take a typing test. The casino hires me. I start acting as if and start excelling at that job. And now that was in 2001. I always remember that. January 2nd, 2001 was my first human resources job. I was in management prior, always in management roles, in leadership roles, management roles. And now I'm suddenly in a profession that I didn't even know what it was when I was in school. So over the next 20 years, by just doing something better than anyone could do, I really paid attention to what other people did and tried to do it differently. I started excelling in my career. And over those 20 years, I started being recognized, not only with my experience, but also my capabilities in doing whatever job I was doing. And I think the latter part of my career, I didn't even have to interview for a job because people knew what I was capable of. Now, in 2008, there was a pretty hefty recession here. I'm sure, I don't know how it affected where you were, but in America, it really kind of tussled a lot of things. And I worked for a company that was a major retailer globally, nationwide. And retail took a big hit because at the time people weren't making money, they were losing their homes, and they really had to pinch pennies and realize what are the things we really need or don't need. And working for a company that had 5 different retail female apparel brands, it really wasn't something that that was going to last. But one thing I learned in that experience working there is not only is change inevitable, but it's how people react to change. When things don't go the way you plan, I think that's where the true strength of an individual comes out. Because to celebrate when things are going really well all the time, that's easy. But when things are not going the way you plan, and you're able to adapt to that and motivate others to adapt to the same thing and progress forward, I think that's an amazing skill set. And at the time, I worked for a leadership team, especially on the human resources side, because of how big our team was, that I started learning really then of how powerful change management can be, not only in a corporation, but also on a personal level. There's so many things happening and news we were expressing amongst the employees at the company that no one really wanted to hear. You know, one day we're saying, I'm sorry, but we laid off 100 people, to, by the way, we're selling this division, or we're splitting this department, or whatever the case may be, or we lost this person because they didn't want to work here anymore. A very well-liked person. It's always the people at the companies that are really good are the ones that choose to leave. It's the ones that are really bad are the ones that we have to say goodbye to. So in essence, when I started my career, I was the one who not only did I wanted to do things better, but I also wanted to do the work that no one else wanted to do. I thought the best way to get recognized is do the work people don't want to do. So I ended up getting involved in a lot of the reductions and became very, very good at reductions in force, RIFs we call them. I could manage hundreds and hundreds of people being let go at any given moment. And I'm telling you, I'd be in a boardroom, Brad, and I look back and I'd have 15 other people either at my level or above that had to meet with people, and I'd have lists and scripts and packages, and I'd guide them. This is what you're going to do. And I'd have people on the speakerphone that were in other states that had to do everything. And I'm like, all right, you guys ready? We start at 9:15. We end at 1 o'clock. Here's every 30 minutes and And then obviously it's almost like battle. The moment the first bullet goes, all the plans go out the window. But I got hungry for dealing with things that didn't go the way they were supposed to, and keeping my cool and understanding, okay, here's a change. What skills do I need to put in place in order to manage this properly? Not only for manage myself, but also how to manage the folks that I'm responsible for. Like, these people are meeting these people in the most tense situation possible. What can I do to make their experience easier? And with change, I use this. I wanted to use this experiment on stage, Brad. I wanted to walk out with like a white carpet, like a swatch carpet on the floor, and come out with like a Cabernet in a glass in a goblet, and spill the glass of wine on the carpet. And I wanted to take a survey about how everyone witnessed the same exact thing, but how did they internalize me spilling that wine? Because I was thinking you'd have some people that say, oh no, that's a white rug. How are you ever going to get that cleaned up? Someone might say, ooh, I really like wine. Why did you waste that wine? Or people even saying, was that supposed to happen? All these things, even though people see the same exact thing, it's amazing how people respond to that and how we react to things. And in keeping that, as I progressed throughout my career, I started to reach a point midlife. I don't know if that's where you are, but midlife of really looking and saying, okay, I've built this successful career over the last 20 years and have made it who I am. And when you mentioned before about being identified, I hit a point in my career where I identified as that person. Like if you asked me at a networking event, who are you? I would say I'm an HR professional or I'm an HR executive. And I'd start with my title. And it got easy because the titles only got bigger and I got admiration and recognition for those types of things. It was the idea that, is that it? Like I started asking myself, is that really going to be the only thing I'm remembered as? Like I want to be a good leader. I want to be a good father. But I created so many limitations, even to the point of how much time I spent with my family, because I thought the more time I spent at work, I'd be more successful, which would lead to more money, bigger positions, and I could provide for my family. And I had it all wrong. I really had it all wrong. 2018, my mother and father-in-law decide to spend their inheritance on us while they're alive. And what they do is take the entire family on an Alaskan cruise. Now, have you ever been on a cruise, Brad?
I haven't.
Wow. Well, you've done a lot of traveling. So, I mean, but in essence, Brad, you're on a boat. You're on a boat and your every expectations are met constantly. You're hungry, great, here's some food. You're thirsty, here's a drink. Like you have to do anything. And it allows you really to think because you're not really worrying about anything. And that was the first time there's even this picture that my sister took of me talking to my son, that was the very first time I ever felt present with my family. Ever. Wow. Ever. In the sense that I am now I'm being a father right now. I'm not thinking about work. It was great not having, when you're an executive, you're on call pretty much 24 hours a day. I tell people, I know there's so much resentment for the fact that higher executives make a lot of money. But for any of you listening, they make the money because they have to sacrifice an enormous amount of time. Like they work for the company 24 hours a day. They don't say that. But if I got a call from my CEO on a Saturday afternoon that I needed to fly somewhere to be in a meeting on Monday, I had to schedule a flight and fly out at 7:00 the next day. Like that's what I did. But to be on this boat, not have access to a cell phone, it started really awakening a lot of things in my brain, like really asking myself, is this the only path I'm meant to take? And then what if I didn't do this? I didn't want to do my profession anymore. Could I be successful in another profession? Would that be stupid? Like, what if? And then there was this distinct moment on the boat where I didn't tell anyone that I decided that I don't want to be an HR professional anymore. And that, I'll tell you, that was one of the heaviest decisions that no one saw me make, that I made for myself. What followed was a very, very difficult road, very difficult and lonely road. When people see you successful and you decide you don't want to be in that position of success anymore, and you see this in Hollywood all the time. I was listening about Dave Chappelle, the guy's at the highest peak of his comedic show career, and then suddenly he decides just to stop being on that show. Now, he had his reasons, and he talks about his reasons on his comedy shows, but he did it, and yet the world completely judged him for it. So in order to prevent people from judging you, Brad, I told no one. I told no one that I wanted to be in my profession anymore. And from that point, not having the right tools and skill set, it just led me down a road of stumbling and figuring things out. Luckily, I have a very close friend that he and I both worked at that company, that retail company, and he had left and started his own business that I had helped him along in becoming an entrepreneur. And he had stumbled a lot dealing with things with his family, money situations, his spouse, that he was able to share a lot of those experiences with me. So I was able to kind of take what he kind of did well, I guess, or not, whatever he figured out, and stumble through it. I reached out to a lot of people that wouldn't judge me, but would offer me sound advice. Former CEOs I worked with, just any professional that I knew I could talk to that would listen and not judge. Because it's very, very hard when we tell the world, I don't want to be this anymore. And people will either project their own fears on you, or sometimes, or most of the time, people the closest to you are doing it out of protection. They want to make sure that you're safe. That's why, but they don't know how to say it the right way. And for the next few months, not communicating properly to my wife, which definitely hurt our relationship for a short period of time, and affected how much she trusted me. At the end of the day, I didn't communicate because, one, I didn't want to be talked out of it because my mind was made up, but I didn't quite understand that. And we talk about it. It's funny how we talk about it now. It's part of my my Buckets of Change framework that I put together to help people get through change. That establishing that trust is extremely important because, like I said, any type of change is extremely lonely. So a few months go by and the universe suddenly starts aligning it. And at the company I was working at as a vice president of human resources, my work was affected. Like I started stumbling at work. I became extremely apathetic and depressed, and I didn't, in the midst of a midlife crisis, basically, I suddenly just didn't care. Even to a point, Brad, I got upset with myself that I didn't care. That I didn't care. Like, I mean, tears rolling down my face going, why don't I care about this? Like, shouldn't I care? Why would I throw this away? And at the end of the day, it was because I was extremely unhappy, identifying and limiting my opportunities based on a job title of what I'm capable of doing to find happiness. Plus, I was very good at doing the job that no one wanted to do, which was telling people they didn't have a job anymore, which, by the way, is not that fun. Doing that a lot. But also being the person that's always in situations where people don't want to be in, it grates on you. I mean, I commend anybody joining that profession. I would love to write an HR book and self-publish it on LinkedIn. And those months go by, and then talking with my CFO who hired me, we just determined that maybe I didn't really share it with him that I was done with my career, but I think I was done with working at the company. So in December of 2018, I got laid off. Greatest Christmas of all time. I mean, greatest, Brad, of all time. You have no idea the weight off my shoulders. Again, my family's still thinking, and my wife specifically, Megan, thinking that, no, Nick's just going to apply for another job and get another job. She knew I was unhappy there, but I end up not telling anybody. And I start doing things from consulting to... I've been podcast producing since I started in 2015. So I was doing that on the side, but I was realizing there's nothing really here that's going to pay my mortgage once my unemployment runs out and my severance runs out. So sometimes when we believe and change is imminent and there's signs in our lives that our current situation is not where we're supposed to be, it's okay to not know what the next step is. Like we were talking about before, about asking someone who graduates from college, like, what do you want to do? Or even when they graduate high school. It's okay to not know. I think the universe will eventually tell you. Something will trigger that and tell you. Obviously, the place not to be is just sitting on your hands and eating all day and watching TV or playing video games all day. That's not, and killing time. That's not it. Being productive, I think, is extremely important. But when you talk about making a living, having something you're putting a lot more... almost as much time as you put with your family, like I did with my career. Obviously, you want to find something that's meaningful, but you might not know what that is. So over the last 5 months in 2015, I was at a networking event at a Chamber of Commerce, and I was handing out business cards, Brad. Like, here, I could produce your podcast and blah, blah, all this stuff. And this guy, I overhear a conversation about construction and everything, and this guy says to me, or the guy someone I'm standing next to says, I just moved to town and it's impossible to find a good house painter. Now, I've been painting houses since I was 14. My wife has farmed me out to paint nurseries, bedrooms, but I always did it for fun. I used to joke, all you got to do is feed me and I'll paint your stuff. I only got paid once for a painting job, but over the course of 30 years, I just did it for free. So something inside me looked at this guy and went, I'll do it. I can paint your house. And immediately when I said it, Brad, I started like, oh no. Like, what did I've never painted a whole house before. I don't know what I'm doing.
Oh no.
So we're chatting and I'm fearful. I give him my card and he says, I'll text you tomorrow and we could work something out. And I was hoping, please God, let him not do that. I mean, I didn't have a job, like a really full-time job. I knew I could do it, but I didn't think like this is going to be a full-time thing. It's just be something to make some money. So he called, I didn't want him to, but he calls me up the next day and I said, great, I'll put a quote together for you, I guess. And I worked with a painter friend of mine. I put it together, completely underbid the guy, like way wickedly underbid the guy, Brad. And then he talked me down. Like when he gave me the deposit, he like took $500 off it. He totally took advantage of me. No but I didn't know. I didn't know anything. So in June or May of 2019, I painted my first house. And shortly after that, in knowing everything I know about how to market a podcast and things I know how to do with building communities on Facebook, I decided that I'm going to be a professional house painter. But guess what, Brad? I told no one. My wife found out I was doing it on the web. She was very upset with me. Very, very upset with me. But again, remember, Brad, what I said, it's like, I guess this whole, the patriarch stereotype is my job was to provide. It didn't matter where it came from, as long as, it should be legitimate and legal, but I have to provide. And I've always provided and I've always excelled in my career and didn't have to work for a job and all these things. And I thought that was just a step in the right direction, but that was a drastic change in lifestyle to what we were accustomed to, being paid in a six-figure executive salary. Yeah. That's when I needed even more help from my best friend who went through that process. And I slugged it along that year, started building up a good clientele. My word got out. I used a lot of social media. I produced a lot of videos. I had a series called the Paint for Thought videos, which were, I loved learning things on the job. I would try to find a way to connect painting to life in general. I mean, that was great. That really, and again, remember I talked about doing things better than others. Like, I think I'm a big believer of differentiating yourself. Like, how do you do the same thing but stand out? And I have to definitely give credit to those efforts, because now I'm a very recognized painter in my town, probably the first painter that you'll find on Google, all because I just continue to do things that were different. Now, was it easy becoming an entrepreneur and working at a 9 to 5, not really 9 to 5, biweekly paycheck schedule? No, it was not at all. But I started surrounding myself with a lot of entrepreneurs and talking to people. My podcast helped out in doing that, to really expose myself to people that made those changes. But talk about emboldened. I felt completely emboldened because of the fact that I did all that. Like, I would go outside and I would smack my work van with this cool artistic wrap that I designed with the artist at the wrap company, and actually would just say out loud, I built this from nothing. Like, this was an idea and I built this from nothing. And I have to remind myself, because sometimes with any business, there's ups and downs, and this year wasn't although busy, wasn't as successful as my previous year, and it's just part of the process. It's almost like, I think, Brad, I'm experiencing my first year in my fifth year. Like, it was so easy during the pandemic. Everyone was remodeling their house. It was just, everyone wanted one painter in their house. My business did very, very well and grew over that period. But to what I was saying before about how when things don't go as planned, it's when you dig deep and find the ways to get through that. That's the most invaluable things you can learn, but also all it does is basically prepare you for the next time something happens and the next time something happens. It just gets easier and easier. and easier. I remember the first time I spilled a bucket of paint and I freaked out completely. It was in front of a customer. It was like, I mean, I dropped it. It spilled all over their carpet. Worst thing ever. I think they were actually replacing their carpets. But I'll be honest, I spilled a paint can yesterday and didn't break a sweat. Didn't break a sweat. I just saved what I could and cleaned it up, and that was it. But in all that being said, we find a career that we feel that we were meant to do, or the one that we choose. But there are a lot of things in the environment that tell us that if you've chosen something and that you're good at, you need to do it as long as you possibly can. But I think that's such BS, because our interests, our passions, our pivots in life change, and we have to adapt to those things, especially if we want to find a happier life and find things to do that make us feel better. And I'm on a mission to ensure that if anyone is in a career that they are doing that they no longer find fulfillment in, but are deathly afraid of making a change. I mean, these are folks that are in careers for a long time. Maybe they even went to school for it, but they're starting to look at their life, the second half of their life, and realize, is this the only path I can take? I'm just there to tell them that, no, it's not.
I love that you're actually living it, and it's not theoretical. You've done this. You've made the change yourself, and now you're sharing tools and techniques with others, which is I'd love to hear a little bit more about buckets of change.
Sure. So I used to do this when I would produce podcasts. It's when you sit in front of someone. I'm a big believer that the best way to connect with a potential client, a customer, is to show them you. I think in this day and age, the most impactful marketing you can do is show yourself. I just think and my podcast career has always been about authenticity. If you see me on the internet and hear me talk, this is the same person you see if I knocked on your door. And when I used to consult with podcast clients and I put them in front of a camera, and I asked them to talk about themselves and their business, they would be all over the place, right? They'd talk a little bit about their childhood, then shoot into how their business operates, and then talk about their parents and do all this stuff. And I found it easier and would say this to them: why don't we take these three things and put them in buckets? Why don't we put who you are in a bucket? Why don't we put about what your business does in a bucket? And then in the third bucket, we're going to talk about how your business can help the people that are watching. But you're not allowed to go into a bucket before the other bucket is empty. Okay, so we would start and we would do one bucket, and then we would do another bucket, and then we would finally, and throughout that time, naturally, in their head, as they're visualizing emptying those buckets, they're naturally talking about things, but coming up with a kind of a more comfortable cadence. And I was thinking, even while I paint, I can't really finish a job, Brad, unless I empty one paint can at a time. If I try to open them all, I'm going to spill more paint. It's going to be an absolute fiasco. Yeah. But it's such a ritual of emptying one bucket, leading into another bucket and another bucket. And as I was thinking about all the things that I've learned about all my personal change, not only me working with corporations, now mind you, I talked about my personal evolution, but I really worked closely with companies throughout my entire career that were going through change. Everything from corporate communication to how we organize the organization and how we empathize with the employees if they're impacted by the change, right through becoming an entrepreneur. So I started really thinking about if I could go back in time and talk to Nick after he got off that cruise in 2018, what easy framework, a conscious bucket by bucket framework could I put together that he could empty one at a time to at least show that he's making progress in that uncomfortable change that he's about to go through. So I put together 5 buckets rather than just those 3 buckets. So one of those buckets is the first one that's really, really important, is about permission. We're raised in a way that we're told what to do, what not to do. When we create these commitments in our head about what we can and cannot do. And just like me, I used to make this commitment that I can't make friends at work because if I do, I might have to fire them someday, and I never want to be in that position. So all these things that limit us from doing what we know needs to happen. I mean, especially when the signs are in the world are telling us that change is inevitable. You have to do something to save your own sanity. But making the conscious effort to give yourself permission to change, permission to be uncomfortable, permission to make people upset, permission to disappoint others, permission to fail. All these things that fall into that category, and also understanding our purpose and our passions and really ironing that piece out. If I don't believe, if I didn't, I stumbled through that, but that was a core piece of my evolution of understanding that I gave myself permission to never go back to that career ever again. Like, I had to say it almost out loud for me to believe it. And it's very, very hard. It's very, very hard. And none of these buckets, emptying these buckets, it's not easy. It's not really easy. That's why I work closely with the people I work with to really make sure that they're understanding. It's like, you know, it's like asking someone to ski, let's say, Brad, or surf for that matter, right? If I take you out on a board, I'm probably going to put you on the biggest board you can be on, because it's the least amount of, like, it's very forgiving, on maybe 3 to 4 feet crests, and I'll put you out there. I'm not going to turn my back on you. I'm going to be right there to watch you and watch you stumble, so I can help you through that process. Continue to reiterate what you did and didn't do right. But that permission piece is a very, very big point, because we can't go to the others without it. The second one is action. That is really, I've given myself permission to do this. Now it's the time to actually do something. And not only do something, but do something different. And that's very, very hard. Within that bucket is also not only what we do on the outside, but what we do on the inside. I had to work very, very hard to understand my own ego, Brad, and understand myself, and really understand what my triggers were, and what created anxiety, and what do I really give a crap about? Like, what do I really want to focus on? And leaning towards things of spirituality, mindfulness, meditation, a lot of things of what goes on the brain, and all those things that we do. That was essential in being able to do. I always I would hate to tell someone that, you know, they say, I can't find a job I like, and they keep moving and they keep not liking the job. Eventually you just have to look at that person and say, maybe it's you, maybe it's not the job. So under that action bucket is really where someone has to really look at themselves, because I'd hate for someone to make such a significant career change or significant change in their life and realize they're still the same person and they haven't done anything to help themselves become better at who they are. The third bucket is imagination, and that's fun, because that's really kind of really looking forward and thinking about the what ifs. Remember I said I talked about that? What if this worked? What if? All the what ifs fall into that bucket, and that's a great exercise I like going through to really brainstorm and figure out, of all the things, even something you thought you wanted to do for, you know, when your parents asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And maybe you said a magician, right? Well, magicians still get jobs. So maybe that could be a path that you could take. And that's that core piece of that bucket there. And then we lean more towards navigation. That's really the planning process of really making sure, what do your first 2 months, 3 months, 6 months look like, or even 12 months look like, because it took me almost a year to figure out what I was going to do. And then finally, that last bucket is transformation. I'm a big believer that we have a strong memory of what we've done well, because we've talked about it, we may have been recognized for it, and we've learned a lot. And when you know you've done something that you didn't know you could do and you did it, there's a level of safety. It feels good to know that. And I think reliving that exercise is important, and reflecting on what you've done and what has changed, and wherever you are at now, whether it be a career or a life situation, is it exactly where you thought you'd be? Is it different? Why is it different? Is it good or bad? But that transformation, that last bucket, again, those 4 previous buckets got to be emptied before that one is even full, to understand, what did that transformation do? Are you in a different place? Do you feel different? Do you do things differently? I like that part. And that's really organic. Like that's something that could be ongoing. And my overall goal in saying all of that, Brad, is I would love to be able to instill those tools, not just one time, but allowing and empowering individuals to use those tools every time, because there's no reason why you can't make a pivot like that in another 10 years from now, or another it could be in your 60s you decide to do something different. I mean, I could tell you, a year ago I was just painting houses. I was just painting houses, and my wife and I looked at each other and said, Nick, or I said, Meg, what do you think I should do when this is all over? And I thought, well, 10 years from now, maybe I'll get tired of painting. Maybe my body won't let me do it anymore. I think I want to speak. I really want to work with others. I really want to instill something and serve others. And in working with my agent, really understanding what I'm capable of sharing with my experience, I was able to come up with the buckets of change that do just that. I mean, that was a choice. That came out of nowhere. Again, one thing that came out of nowhere, Brad. And every time you do something like that, it excites me more and more to do something else and do something else. But you will never make a change worthy of the happiness that you deserve if you don't make a conscious decision to go, yes, I think I can do this. I know I can do this, and basically give yourself permission to take everything that goes along with it. So there you go.
I'm so glad you did. I'm so glad you did make that shift, because if you hadn't, this model wouldn't exist. And the dream of becoming a full-time speaker, I mean, that's just abstract. That's not even in the ether. So you had to take the steps one at a time. And something I'd love to get your perspective on is, how do people deal with that fear of actually making a positive change in their life? Because I've been at these points in my life where, whether it's your beliefs or whether it's other people's stories or whatever it is, or just pure fear, you don't make that change. And I love what you said about transformations, because from my perspective, a fulfilling life is a life that is a series of transformations. The more the better. I mean, okay, you don't want to change every year, might be a bit too much, because then you never become a master of your craft. But regular transformation, so you keep yourself fresh. So anyway, how do people overcome that fear of change?
I think the fear comes from, it's natural. It's something that's absolutely natural. It's that lizard part of your brain that's been there longer than we walked upright, of just simply protecting you. And that's all it does. I've gotten to a point that anytime I feel that, all I do is take a step back and stop and say, what is my brain trying to protect me from right now? That's all. That's all it's doing. I think we get hung up on it because in essence, it's so much easier to feel safe than it is to feel unsafe. But the irony is, if I was to find something and maybe work a little bit harder to find something that makes me happier, wouldn't it all just kind of wash away? Like, I don't feel, my friends and I, my best friend and I, we call them triggers. It's just like, or tricksters. We call them tricksters. It's these things that get in your head, your inner monologue that'll just suddenly tell you, maybe that's not a good idea. And that's a good thing. I think we're supposed to have those things. I don't think you will ever overcome fear. I mean, the Terminator doesn't have any fear, right? But everybody, it's not a good guy. I think being in tune with what you're afraid of is truly important. I think being able to say, there's a lot of things that I can say, like one of my biggest fears is I don't want to disappoint anyone. Disappointing people is something I don't ever want to do. And unfortunately, with the job I do, being one person doing multiple jobs all the time, it's very hard not to disappoint someone. So I've come to grips with knowing, one, I know where that comes from. That comes from a relationship with my father that is a trauma that just sits there that I can't change. That's just what it is. My only purpose is to understand what triggers it. So I make a conscious decision to say, I won't disappoint everyone, but it's okay if I disappoint someone. It's okay. I don't think it's never. I'm always waiting for the shoe to drop in my head, Brad, but it never does. But I think embracing that fear is important. But before, 5-6 years ago, I didn't really understand that. I just was afraid. I didn't know what that was. Not until I decided I didn't want to do my job anymore. And trust me, I was in tears at sometimes through a bout of depression I've never experienced before in my life, all because I didn't know what was going on in my own head. But a part of that action bucket's really understanding, what are those things? What are those fears that are triggered, and embrace them. Let's really talk about them. And you should, I think it takes a lot of courage to admit to the world what you're really afraid of. I'm really afraid of. Am I working on it? Yes. But am I afraid of it? Yes. I hope that answers your question. It's not I don't think there's a magic pill. Man.
Yeah, it does.
That whole fearless thing.
Yeah, it's I don't think that anyone is truly fearless unless the amygdala
Yeah,
part of their
I know.
brain
It
has
just
somehow
doesn't
been
work.
removed. But I love what you say about the lizard brain, and I think fear is always there, and putting it into perspective is so important, because if you fear is a habit, anxiety is a habit as well. So the more you practice, the better you get. So sometimes we need to deliberately fact check, is it necessary? And that brings me to something you mentioned earlier on, which is the importance of mindfulness and spirituality. So I'd love to hear your perspectives on having a spiritual
I would
practice in your
say
life.
I would never consider myself one of these yogi gurus, like, ever. That's definitely not my thing. When my best friend introduced me to meditation, I didn't know what it was. I didn't understand what that was. I think it's much more prominent now. I'd say 5 years ago, it was kind of where it is, but now it's becoming more and more and more. Companies coming over from the pandemic are really spending a lot more time understanding their employees and how they feel, and how they deal with it, how crisis impacts individuals. Uh, so when I knew I was afraid of all these things and dealing with all these issues and depression, I knew, I was like, I gotta pick myself out of this. I have to stop that constant voice in my head from the moment I wake up to the time I go to bed. I can't stop it. Once I realized it was there, I have to figure out, how do I control it? How do I really overcome this huge weight of my brain constantly trying to guide me and trick me and make me think things that don't exist, making assumptions about things that have never happened before, or regretting things that happened in the past that I can't change. And something that is fairly simple, one is breathing, is taking a breath through your nose and expanding your diaphragm, doing a lot of diaphragmatic breathing, which is what babies do. We do as babies. If you see a baby breathe, a baby, it's a baby's abdomen expands drastically when they cry and breathe. But yet, as we get older, do you realize how much more tense? And I don't think I read this anywhere, Brad. I think it's simply biologically, as we get older, or as we grow older, even when man roamed the earth, all our insides are here. Like, a lot of stuff needs to be protective. So suddenly now we have to tighten up everything. We have to protect everything, and we do that. We unconsciously tense up our abdomens, but learning how to breathe and use my diaphragm in a very rhythmic way. And I'm not really big on sitting in a quiet room. And one thing your listeners, if they don't already know this, is there is a plethora of guided meditations on YouTube, or you can get an app. Calm, I believe, is an app. Well, they will play music, and you can listen to abundance and gratitude affirmations. Gratitude affirmations are amazing. Of just allowing your brain to focus on something and allow those thoughts to come in and out of your mind. I've learned that you can't stop your mind from working in this exercise. It's really about allowing a thought to move through it, like a stick down a stream, but don't focus on that stick. And it does take practice. This isn't something that meditation, that's why people quit, because they try it once and it doesn't do what they want them to do. It does take practice. And I remember doing it for a year and realizing how much farther ahead I was, that I could easily slow my thoughts down. And then even to a point now where I could be in the midst of something, and just by taking 5 quick, or not quick, but rhythmic diaphragmatic breathing breaths, to slow things down. I'm also lucky that I get to do something what I love to do for a living every day, Brad. So it really helps. That really helps too. But that breathing, I think, is one step in the right direction of realizing how to slow down your mind. Now, there's many other things you can dive into between yoga and transcendental meditation, which I know is a lot more complex. But any way to slow yourself down and be more present, and that's one thing I didn't say throughout all my buckets, is the goal is to be present, to not assume what hasn't happened, or overthink what hasn't happened, or regret things that have already happened. I was doing that so much in my life, and I needed that to stop. And now, just like I was on that cruise, I can be present anytime I want to with my wife, Megan, and my kids, Abby and Nate, or even with you on this call. I mean, I'm not thinking about anything else but this call, this podcast right here. So it's those things that skills with practice just becomes who you are. It's a great tool to have.
It's interesting. Our journeys are quite aligned, quite parallel in terms of corporate world and exploring lots of different things, but then ultimately discovering the power of a clear mind, and presence is one of the states I aspire to most, because it's during those moments that you are no longer thinking about the future or the past or anything else. You're just here. If only you could sustain it, right? I guess that's when you achieve some kind of yogic state.
Well, the one thing I could say, Brad,
do you find that? No,
well,
please.
The one thing I could say, Brad, is you become more aware. When you become in tune with how present you can be, you realize how a majority of the world choose what they do to supplement. Maybe not so much. I know mindfulness might not be for everyone, but how people self-medicate, whether they drink, whether they recreational drugs, and they smoke marijuana to kind of calm down, take prescribed drugs. It's all an art. I'd hate to be dependent on an artificial platform to bring myself here. And I joke with my friends is I never know when Friday is, because to me it's another day. I don't stress for 5 days just to feel present on a Friday. You know, that's not the path I ever want to be on, whether or not I'm painting houses, whether or not I'm speaking in front of 1,000 people, or whether or not I'm working with a client working on their third bucket. You start seeing it. It's like all the wool's been pulled aside, and you start to understand more about how much self-medication is out there and how much judgment people, that's another thing. It's just how much judgment they project on others. I'm not a lot of fun when we go out sometimes, because I kind of just sit there and I don't say anything because everybody's drinking. And I mean, no, not for nothing, Brad. You know, I'll enjoy an IPA now and then, but I obviously don't. I don't use alcohol to flush my weekend away. It's not. I'd rather spend time, and because it can be damaging, especially it's someone. You know, I'm going to be 48 in a few months, and I don't think I look that old. I love when customers flatter me by telling me, homeowners tell me, "Oh, what are you?" And you only when they hear how old my kids are do they realize how old I am. But it's all because I live a much healthier life now than I did. But not a perfect, you know, I'm not eating wheat germ and you know, raw eggs for breakfast. I eat right. My wife cooks amazingly healthy for us, and I just take care of myself. I think that's a big piece of it.
It is. I think it's having that self-awareness and then putting in place habits that mean ultimately that combine to enable you not to have that desire and craving for pain relief. I think it's a Buddhist phrase, which is happiness is a temporary relief from suffering. And so many people, their baseline is suffering. However, it's also a choice. Like, of course, there are people who are suffering due to very real situations in their environment. That's different. But this mental suffering is kind of always there, and you can relieve it through exercise and healthy eating and finding activities when you're in flow state. You're just completely immersed. And that's something I was going to ask you. Do you find you get into your flow zone
every time
while painting?
Every time I have a paintbrush. I had a morning the other day. I don't know. I was running late maybe. Again, that whole thing. I over communicate to homeowners when I'm going to be at their house, and if I show up 5 minutes late, I feel terrible, which is just my own issue. And I swear to God, the moment I get a paintbrush in hand, I mean, I had a 17-foot pole with a roller on it today, painting a foyer, and I'm so lucky to be able to do that. Now, it's not the only thing I enjoy doing, but to make a living doing that and just see my work at the end of the day is something that is just to see. To put energy into something and see a result, you know, like squeezing a piece of coal and having a diamond is just such a rewarding thing. The dopamine in my brain is just like every day. It's just awesome. It's awesome at the end. Even when things go wrong, I still I'm in control. I know exactly what I can do. I'm not going to sweat it. and I love it. But I'll tell you, yeah, that's definitely a passion that I stumbled across just on a quick networking event that paid back dividends. When you were talking about suffering, I don't know if you ever read this book, The Four Agreements. It's for your listeners, Don Miguel Ruiz wrote this book called The Four Agreements, and it's a parable book, but talks about, it's almost like buckets. These four agreements to live a happier life amongst all the suffering. To commit yourself to these four agreements, these four commitments, will provide you a much happier life, a more fulfilling life. And the four agreements are be impeccable with your word, which is really important to understand when you speak how powerful your word is. Don't take anything personally. That's another thing too that really helped. This was a mantra book. During my midlife crisis, I listened to this audiobook 15 times a week. I mean, all the time. Don't make assumptions. That's another very powerful thing. And then the fourth one is do your best. No matter what, do your best. No matter how tired you are, if it's the best you can do, it's the best you can do. And this book starts off, the parable in the beginning, Brad, talks about how we are living in hell. Like we think hell is this place people, if you're a religious person, where people go when you die. But life is suffering. Like life is work and hard things to deal with, and crisis and events and things you don't expect, and sorrow and grief and all these things. And that's why people medicate themselves, and that's why people try to escape it. And unfortunately, some people do that with suicide. It's to understand that, but knowing that if you wake up and decide, I'm going to rewire my brain and say, this is what I'm going to believe today. This is what I'm going to believe today, and from this day forward. It may change, but I'm going to commit to these four things. And it's helped me along the way, especially from not taking things personal. I went through 20 years in a corporate environment, and I'm telling you, you want to swim in a lake of egos, you work in a corporate environment, and people will say and project a lot of things. And when I learned not to take anything personally, it was an enormous weight off my shoulders. So that book was one of those books in my library. Once my son just made a bookshelf for me in wood shop. I got to put that in the studio behind me. That's one of the books that's going to be on the back. Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy choosing to change things in your life is not an easy thing. That's why not a lot of people do it. But anyway, I could be a part of that change with someone and alleviate that pain. That pain is something that I can't take it away completely, like we talked about before, Brad, and you said you can't be fearless. The fear is going to be there. But to have someone next to you, Brad, you know this. You've gone through, I'm sure, a time in your life where it was difficult. But being able just to lean on someone, it makes it's so much easier. It makes it so much easier. And I just would enjoy being that person that people can lean on.
Thank you, Nick. I might take you up on that offer at some point myself, and I'm sure many people will. For those who are interested in finding out more about Buckets of Change, and I love the names of the buckets. In my mind, I couldn't help but spell the word paint.
Hey, look at that. That's how that works. I love acronyms.
And I love it. I love acronyms, and I think it makes so much sense, especially with transformation at the end. So for people who are interested in finding out more and connecting with you, how can they get in touch?
You can find me on the socials. I'm on Instagram at Buckets of Change. Just launched that page as well. Soon enough, I'll be launching the Facebook community, Buckets of Change community. But if I could do this, if you could do this for me, Brad, I don't have the exact probably the easiest way to do this is I created an assessment, and I may have mentioned a few times in me talking about knowing the signs, like when are things kind of happening around you where it may be telling you that maybe a change is needed. And I've created it. It's free. It's this quick 2 to 3 minute Buckets of Change assessment. And the way to get it, if you can do this for me, Brad, if you can put my email, nick@bucketsofchange.com, in your show notes. And if you'd like to take this assessment, again, it's very, very quick. email nick@bucketsofchange.com, and in the subject line, just write the word paint. And I'll send you a link. And you can take that, and that may kind of let you know that either A, you're in an amazing place. It's good. You don't need to, I wouldn't change anything. B, you might be in a spot where things are a bit iffy and change might be in your future, or you might just realize and just may need the assessment to show you that change is imminent. You need to make a change in what you're doing to find the happiness and joy you deserve. And time is running out, because taking that one step just leads to another step towards that fulfillment. So yeah, if you could do that for me, that would be great, Brett.
We'll get that done. Anyone who's listening, please do check out Nick's email in the show notes, as well as links to the socials. Nick, thank you so much. What a refreshing conversation, and wonderful to get to spend some time with you today.
Thank you, Brett. This was awesome. Thank you.
So thanks everyone for joining this session, and see you in the next one.